Fusion versus EA Canada and the world. As Fusion grew within Electronic Arts Canada, it gained the attention of the numerous studios and divisions across EA globally, and especially from its immediate neighbors in Vancouver, Canada. And those that shared the building with Fusion were especially observant. The competitive rivalry was palpable, if not outright destructive. But the company fanned those fires of dog-eat-dog divisive division versus division, it seemed. I believe they wanted teams to fight for hiring the best staff from each other and drive innovation to shine above each other. We were all competing with one another. Even though Fusion had its champions in the EA worldwide executive leadership, they were loath to engage with studio politics and product development details outside just the consumer game design experience directly with that studio. EA Worldwide typically seemed to care primarily about consumers and profitability, and whether the game would attain consumer and reviewer praise, thus driving more unit sales and revenue. The only way Fusion could defend itself year on, year out was by proving itself through incredible efficiency, shared innovative technologies, and development best practices, development cost efficacy, utilization of contract developers and internal teams with great profitability. Fusion established itself as the second most profitable division within Electronic Arts worldwide. We protected ourselves from incursions into our operations and business from other EA groups and divisions, which in the future, when Warren Wall left the group and we lost with him our authority and influence across EA and our protection, it became that our work was our only real defense line. We no longer had an executive champion that would step out of a comfort zone and get involved to resolve and protect us from corporate politics or organizational threats. And so, we exported innovation tech that divisions would adopt. But of course, they would modify them slightly, and unfortunately rebrand them too as their own. They would wait a year or more, though, before rebranding, so that people would forget that it came from us in Fusion. It was a sinister way to steal from us, but we got the credit when we needed it, when we first handed it off. Like I said, the rivalry against our group was extraordinary. Our success and our innovation was extreme, and the rivalry was correspondingly extreme. We attracted love and jealous hate from all over EA. Some groups became so hateful and intent on tearing down Fusion that they sought to poach our staff to work for them with no regard to our projects or their schedules. They would plead victim to get the best new hires for the studio, alleging that Fusion always hires the best people and we get stuck with the dregs. Well, the truth was, Fusion interviewed much better and very precisely targeted people with the skills that aligned with the work we had and with the team. We made sure new hires were passionate about the work and the games as well as the tech. And we made sure that people had interest in games or tech. If there was only one, then we determined if we had a job that would benefit an exclusionary focus. Persuasion and influence and leverage were not always enough to protect Fusion from smaller or siege assaults against us. Most studios saw how successful and profitable we were in Fusion, with making games like Madden Football and The Sims, NBA Live, so many more, FIFA. They concluded that they could take the revenue for themselves by just taking those games themselves back and making handhelds. EA was structured such that studios owned particular games and IP. They owned specific technologies. Typically, the owner would own the maintenance and release of those products or tech, but they would share it to anyone who wanted it. Of course, there were times that some groups inherited a tech or a product that they didn't even want, but it became theirs to maintain going forward for the rest of EA. Because of the EA Studio ownership model, Fusion was at risk of losing virtually all of its portfolio going forward, because we made handheld versions of most EA games. Dave McCarthy, Tony Lamb, and I went on an EA Studio World Tour hat in hand, making our case as to why shifting development from Fusion would harm the consumer promise and experience, not to mention they would cost more than twice what Fusion would to make the games. We were high quality. We had proven it through Metacritic and consumer feedback and reviews. We hit all of our schedule dates very reliably, and we were extremely profitable, proven by raw number of unit sales and the unit profit. But some studios were not having it. They were determined to make the revenue from Fusion for themselves, even if it cost twice as much to make it, and that they did not know how to make the software. Well, we made our case for Fusion retaining development authority over all games handheld to EA Worldwide. And they got involved reluctantly because they knew EA revenue was in the crosshairs. Fusion was hands down the most efficient studio in EA Worldwide, and they knew it. It was the second most profitable group in EA, and they knew it. But it was the youngest EA studio, and so it did not have deep state connections and politics everywhere throughout the studio. And of course, it also meant that Fusion was not shackled, though, by its old ways or old thinking of EA, or antiquated tools, libraries, pipelines, frameworks, engines, or tech. EA Worldwide awarded Fusion total ownership of all EA handheld games going forward. Fusion could delegate them back to studios, but it was Fusion's decision. Fusion was back in control of its destiny. We were product owners. Fusion was a lot like me, self-learning, self-innovating, always trailblazing, pioneering. But we were alarmed that corporate politics threatened our existence and our autonomy. We had to find a way to be less vulnerable should EA Worldwide change the mind in the future and attack us. Winning the battle did not mean that other studios would accept it and go away. It did not mean EA Worldwide would not change their mind. They were bonused based on how well their studios performed, and they coveted Fusion's profitability. It was Fusion's success that catapulted Dave to run Fusion as its head, president, and EA corporate vice president. He went from a producer to that. And I was promoted from technical director to chief technology officer, and eventually chief operating officer with a CTO reporting to me. And my COO at the time, he was promoted to become an EA Canada COO for the country. Fusion was wildly successful, and we were recognized for our cornerstone roles in our creation and growth and success of Fusion. I was responsible for a lot in Fusion. For people, designed Fusion Central Team's organization, and I directed game team staffing and training. I managed technical direction teams. I managed all central engineering and technology staff and resources. I dotted line managed all of Fusion's central content teams. I managed all external development strategies and plans, audits, and I provided mitigation plans. I managed and directed all technology development, licensing, and integration. I directed engineering performance reviews and training roadmaps. I interfaced and drove quality with EA Canada Central Quality Assurance Groups. I interfaced with international localization and quality assurance partners for global releases and in processes. I created and drove EA Canada's mentorship program. I created EA Canada's interview techniques and standards. I directed all hiring for the division and negotiated hiring with other divisions. I created engineering job family matrix and a what good looks like career roadmap with documented leadership and skill requirements, which became the blueprint for EA worldwide, creating a job family matrix for producers, designers, managers, artists, and engineers. I developed materials and presented them as TED Talks to many groups of over 175 plus people within EA's bigger picture theater. In interview training, mentorship training, development training, and insights for video game console and handheld device development training, I taught architecture and software design, data structure, algorithms, and approaches specific to video game development, including potential ways for new application ideation, debugging, and optimization, both in abstract and specific applications in the platforms and the games we were making. I did so much. In product, I audited and I assessed development schedules and estimates, dependencies. I analyzed their threats. I did risk assessment and mitigation. I reviewed technologies for existing and new. I analyzed assets and localization plans. I provided staffing, resourcing, alternative approaches, and solutions for implementation against big gaps or high risk within development teams, internal or external. I drove game and tech feature prioritization and cost versus quality analysis, using task breakdowns of a 1/2 to 5 day maximum duration with associated dollar costs to make real to people how expensive features really are to the team and to the company, and quality estimation of 1 to 4, avoiding odd numbers so people must decide which side of good enough the quality was, and a quality average and aggregate for art, audio, gameplay, story, and all features as a collective total quality. There is a total process to everything, and people joke that I use the Force, like Star Wars, to somehow grok everything and find a hole in their incredibly huge, complicated, detailed plans. And I supported innovation and creativity, free expression innovation development, aka what we called Fusion Labs. Basically, little mini teams that can go off and make their own demos in hopes of securing a new product commitment. And in technology, I innovated and created shared libraries through EA for game and memory, file management, 2D and 3D graphics conversion and formatting and rendering, including pre-baking runtime address fix-ups for speed wherever possible, sound and music conversion, mixing and playback, input control, local and internet network libraries, standard matchmaking user interfaces, cross-game communication libraries and assets, and manufacturer technical requirement checklists, TRC or TCR compliance libraries and guidelines, all per game and aggregate analytics across the products in collection and reporting. It's just so much, it's almost too much to say, and I'm not done. I built standardized tools, libraries, and pipelines for PlayStation Portable, GameCube, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. I oversaw, directed, and approved software design and architecture through all development stages. And then there was hardware. I directed design and development and manufacturing of EA Sports Active custom motion tracking game controller hardware. I innovated emulator hardware and software for the yet-to-be-created gaming consoles and handhelds, including a complete PlayStation Portable emulator on an Xbox 360 console using a Casio little TV attached to an Xbox controller, glued to it. The result was a handheld gaming device, albeit attached to an Xbox 360, which fully used the same code that would be used in a Sony PlayStation Portable, with mirrored libraries. Engaged directly, I did, with platform manufacturers to shape their software development kits, their SDKs, and even their next generation hardware designs. I convinced Sony to add memory to the PSP, change its memory bus, and add a DMA system between its Universal Mini Disk UMD and its Read Buffer Random Access Memory, or RAM. In other words, it had memory bottlenecks, and I showed them where to fix them, and they did. The list of things that I was responsible for and delivered are vast and impressive by anyone's standards. You combine that with everything else that I've done in my life and shipped, and while working in foreign countries, I have to tell you, I impress even myself. With success comes scrutiny, however. Within EA Canada, there was a chief technology officer named Gavin Chang, while I was the CTO for Fusion. Gavin was allegedly the guru that was behind EA Sports, back from Distinctive Software. After a few months at EA, Gavin asked me what I thought of EA with my limited experience. It was a loaded and dangerous question. I was new. What could I legitimately say with confidence that I knew about EAC, EA Canada? Well, I guess I always did have an opinion, and this was no exception. I answered, EAC is not what I expected. I imagined the pinnacle of development expertise. I envisioned the most laser thinking and crystal clear strategies to channel creativity into innovative features and polished experiences. I thought that I had arrived and was allowed to work and enter at EA Olympus, where the gods of game development lived and worked. But what did I find? I found a bunch of super talented people that do whatever they feel like, as long as it somewhat relates to an intended experience. They do not seem to own features or delivery against defined expectations. I see they are just scheduled, but they slip and it does not mean anything. There are no consequences and no one cares. I furthered. An auditing and progress assessment, I see it done. But the same thing, they just move the dates. And when the dates move again, they just move out. They rarely cut features. It feels like everyone just does what they feel like. They just do what they think is the right thing. But they do not do anything about insight that they may have gleaned or things they should improve. And I already see they just do this and they repeat that behavior over and over. The only reason this approach works, I asserted, is because EA Sports has been making sequels for so many years that the teams do not need to understand the very code or tools or pipelines that they're using anymore. They hardly even need to understand the features from yesteryear's releases. In fact, they literally just bolt on changes without seemingly knowing how it all works under the hood. I think that's terrible, honestly. I wish that I could fix it. But I'm happy just to be in Fusion, seeing what I can do there, I told him. Well, Gavin Chang was formerly the Chief Technology Officer of Electronic Arts Canada, the country. All countrywide operations, including EA Vancouver, EAC, EA Vancouver Black Box, EAX, Electronic Arts Montreal, EAM, and all respective contracted studios thereof. Gavin had grown up through the ranks of EA Canada from its origination of Distinctive Software before it was purchased by Electronic Arts to become EA Sports. He rose with the water level of EAC, being promoted as people were hired out around him, despite his not having the ability. There were a few of the original Distinctive Software people like Gavin that were still in EA Canada. They were held in venerable status by most people, and importantly by EA worldwide executives. EA Canada founders were made men, like the Mafia made men. They were protected. Gavin had the nickname of the Chief Non-Technology Officer, or the CNTO. Gavin's engineering skills were on par with a recently graduated computer science major, barely knowing what to do in a real job. Gavin's technical skills were not up to the job of leading a 2,000-person organization technology team, much less engineering designs and plans on products. It was evident that Gavin was emeritus. He had no genuine clout or authority within EA anymore, if he ever had authority. With Gavin Chang being the Chief Non-Technology Officer, it fell upon me to own all tech for Fusion. That was fine for me because I knew what had to be done, and it was obvious that Gavin had no idea what had to be done. I met and became allied with EA Worldwide's Chief Technology Officer, Scott Krantz. Scott was a seasoned engineer, but had not done much hands-on work, significant coding at all, in years. Honestly, if he even knew how to. But Scott knew enough to understand software designs to call bull on most people. His tech experience was sufficient for a super senior director, but he would fail if he had to get into the code and find or fix something. Scott's superpower was his political prowess and network across the globe. He was a sommelier and owned several high-end restaurants. He used his restaurants to host power executive and developer meetings to unite and focus leaders and creators. He hosted developer conferences and made sure new technologies made within EA or were available to EA outside were communicated to all studios to assess and maybe adopt. Scott was an excellent interface and broker for EA technology. The key takeaway for me was this: Scott Krantz was an ally that could help me navigate and negotiate across EA, but he was not a source for solving technical or engineering problems, or for architecture or design. Scott proved to be an excellent ally, though, within EA. As EA Fusion grew, we created more and more games, which created more and more revenue. Fusion was wildly successful. Our portfolio of games had grown to include handheld gaming and console video games. We proved handheld gaming could be major income streams and was of value for consumers just as much as home television console games. And we established standardized tools and techniques to leverage and share art and audio and tools and game source code between handheld and console home games. With our triumph in handheld market and early success in the console market, EA Worldwide decided to go big with Fusion and invest even more money so that we could advertise our product line with much larger budgets. Comparatively speaking, from our humble beginning, we had huge marketing budgets. We also had increased development budgets to hire internal and external teams. Fusion was on a tear, with hitting home run after home run. Tony and I joke sometimes that we should take over the world of EA via a reverse takeover. He imagined that we would be so successful that EA Worldwide would appoint us in command of EA Canada, not just our business unit and studio of EA Fusion. That never happened, but it was one of the motivators to help us get through the more difficult times. Fusion was always competing with EA Canada and EA Black Box, EAX. Everyone was jealous and envious of Fusion. We walked on water and we parted seas with our constant stratospheric success and unheard of rate of growth. Over 2 months, we hired 60 employees during one of our growth bursts, one person every single day. Well, some days were multiple hires and some days were none, but it averaged out to hiring one person every day for 2 months. Although hiring 60 people in 60 days was our all-time high for hiring, we interviewed so many people that we would joke more than half of our job was interviewing and hiring and onboarding and training. We developed a lot of new hire documentation and samples to ramp people up as quickly as possible. We assigned a mentor to every new hire to be their shepherd and guide within EA for their first 90 days. It was a major part of my role, hiring the best people for the right roles and exiting the people that did not pull their weight by failing to do their assignments to the quality or at all. Fortunately, we had remarkably few bad hires, and so this was a rare situation for us, for me. Fusion was kicking butt, and it was taking names.